All right, welcome to today's workshop. Today's workshop is going to be over crafting an academic vita and resume. I'm Jada Ruff. I'm a graduate assistant for the Graduate Studies Department. And our two presenters today are Dr. David Vail and Laura Moody. Dr. Vail is an associate professor for the Department of History, and Mrs. Moody is a clinic coordinator and internship coordinator for the Communication Disorders Department. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that our workshops are recorded and they are posted on the UNK's website, which can be found on the Graduate Studies page under Professional Development Workshops. And as we go through the workshop, if anyone has any questions, please utilize the chat box and place your question there, and we'll have someone monitor that, and we'll answer those as we go. And so we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you, Jada. I'll go ahead and get started here in our presentation. And we're gonna start out by talking about what is included in a resume and kind of the purpose of a resume, and then we'll have some comparisons to what a CV might look like and its purpose. So a resume is a document that is meant to market your skills and your experiences. This is something that should get you the interview. So it's something that will make you look like a good match or someone that they want to talk to find out about how you might fit the position that you're applying for. A couple of side notes to keep in mind: it is not meant to be kind of your life's history, and I think sometimes transitioning from graduate school into the professional world, we have to remember that all the things you did in high school are wonderful, but that's not what's meant to be included in your resume now. This should be about your education and your experiences moving forward. Some other tips or hints for the resume is also to keep in mind, I've heard of some people wanting to include even like a photo or something, and that's not what the resume is meant for. It should be a clean and professional document. Let's see. There we go. So looking at the basics of what we want to include, like I said, you want to have your education. That's something that you spend a lot of time and effort towards completing, and so you want to highlight that along with relevant experiences. Those experiences, you'll want to think about those within your experience during education, as well as other maybe work experiences that might also be relevant. Those experiences should be listed in reverse chronological order. And so you'll want things that are more recent towards the top and then moving kind of backwards. As far as those basic content pieces, references, I wanted to mention that that's something that you'll want to provide, but isn't something to be listed on the resume. You'll want to provide those upon request. When you're writing up your resume, you really want it to highlight you well. And so you want to use strong action words as you're describing your various experiences. So rather than maybe I did a presentation, I might say I led a group to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to really highlight what I've done using some really intentional word choice. And you want to make for sure that your resume is error-free as you're going through. So make sure you have more than one person read through it and look for any spelling errors and things like that as you're crafting that resume. It should be short and concise. Again, it's not the actual interview, it's meant to get you the interview. So 1 to 2 pages is very appropriate for crafting that resume. Other tips and hints to keep in mind is avoiding pronouns like I, me, and my. You want to highlight yourself without using those pronouns on your resume. You can remove articles such as a, an, and the. Also, when you're creating your headings and breaking apart your resume so that it is something that's user-friendly to look at, it should be easy to read. I recently heard an employer say, "Don't make me do a lot of work. I just want to be able to read through it easily and really see all that you've done." So you want to use headings with bold or underline or italics, but using one at a time, not 2 or 3 at a time, and being consistent in that. So I wanted to walk you through what one of my resumes looks like, kind of as an example. Let me switch over to that. All right, so this is a resume that I used years ago, so it has some old information on it, but I thought it was more relevant for when I was looking for employment just after finishing my master's. So you can see that I'm a loper. I graduated from UNK, so you've all made a great decision in being here. So you want to highlight your education. So again, going in reverse chronological order, starting with a master's degree and then highlighting your undergraduate degree. When I was looking for this position that this resume was used for, I wanted to highlight some of the specialty training that I had received. So I didn't have a lot of experience, as you'll see when we get down there, as far as job experience. So I really wanted to highlight the additional education and training I had received while I was at the position that I was at when moving, when applying for a new job. So that is very specific to what I do. I should have told you, I'm a speech language pathologist. So I am clinical in nature. I'm now training students in that on the academia side, but really I am clinical as far as my practice and experience goes. And so then here I made my resume just one page. So you can see that we're already reaching the end of that, but I wanted to highlight my employment experience and how I displayed that on my resume. When I was applying for this particular position, I had just spent a year at home with my child. And so one of the things that employers want to know about are gaps in employment. So you can see, noted that by just saying that I was on maternity leave and included that time so that they knew what I had been doing. And then you can see that I included my work experiences as far as where I was at and including some of the highlighted responsibilities that I had at those particular positions. And one other thing I did with this resume, I was applying for a position that was related to Scottish Rite and a position that they fund. And so I included here with this bolding that I had some experience there because I wanted the employer to know that that was something that I had done and that that would jump out off the page at them. So there is my example. I'll get us back over to the PowerPoint and turn things over to Dr. Vale.
Well, first, thank you, Laura, for such a good, succinct review of resume building. And for me, I really struggled when I was a student in at least at the master's level, like between my undergrad and first semester of graduate school, like what the difference was, what I need to start thinking about in terms of, the distinctives. And so I'm excited to share sort of on the CV side. Also, welcome everybody to our session. And I just want to say thank you to Office of Graduate Studies for hosting these types of workshops. And I know Laura and I are both really honored to share some of our own personal experience, how we built these types of documents, what to be thinking about. And it can be a very intimidating process, especially for graduate students who are sort of new into academia. Maybe you're a first generation graduate student. And so, this can seem like a tidal wave of like info. So we're going to try to, I hope I also help, just like Laura has, with kind of giving us a sense of how to proceed with some of this material, and also excited to show you some examples. But most importantly, answer your questions. And so as we go along, especially with the CV stuff, which is very detailed, and if you're like me and nerd out on it, then it gets really, really detailed. I've become excited about building my CV. Don't judge me. But I will say, like, at any point, if you have questions, please point that out in the chat, and we'll get to those, because I think part of this is just having a conversation to kind of reveal what's involved and take some of the mystery and therefore the scariness out of it. I mean, at least for me, it was worrisome for me to try to figure this out by myself. So I'm glad that we can do this and be part of what graduate studies is doing. Okay, so what is a curriculum vitae, a CV? That's distinctly an academic resume, to put it kind of in basic parlance, but it's a much more detailed document, as we'll find out, than a resume is. And a resume, as Laura points out, you want to be very succinct and very direct because you have precious real estate there. You have like 1 to 2 pages that you have to really articulate With a CV, you can be kind of like academics are, long-winded. But I will say, that was a joke, everybody, but I will say it is important to have a structure to it, to have be succinct if you can, to show details where you need to, but not too much. And so some of the same basic rules honestly apply between resumes and CVs. And we'll get to some of the comparison points in a little while. So what is a curriculum vitae? It's a document that presents your qualifications for academic employment and or graduate school. So it's a very distinctly academic sort of survey of what you've done. And in that sense, it is teaching, research, service. As we'll find out, like for me, I had to think of what about stuff that doesn't fit into those three main categories, because as a professor of history and a historian in training, when I was going on the job market, I had to like figure out what about all the stuff that doesn't really fit nicely into those categories. Like, what do you do with that? I mean, does that count? Does it not count? Where do I put it? And so we can talk about that as well. Also, it addresses your education, research, teaching publications, presentations. So already you can tell how detailed it is. You do want to always be mindful, and I would imagine this is probably true. We can come back to this in a resume scenario as well, but you always want to be mindful of how you're articulating your professional development, right? How you're growing as a professional historian, in my case, that kind of expands beyond just the teaching, the research, and the service. And those categories, by the way, are pretty common across academic disciplines, more or less. And so that's kind of, those are generic concepts that will serve you well, whatever you specialize in your graduate degree and your profession later. And then your academic accomplishments. And so therefore, it is rather lengthy and detailed. And so like a hiring committee in an academic context is going to want to see how you're evolving with this type of detail, sort of definitely more, I guess, more granular than a resume, right? For obvious reasons. And so you again, you want to be mindful of that. And I'm glad we can have this workshop where we can sort of discuss strategies, how to do that, and not just sort of like guesswork, because that's how I felt when I was putting mine together so many years ago now. So it's also a guide to where you have been academically and professionally, right? That's sort of self-evident from what I've said so far. Like obviously you're going to be articulating the things you've done in a given year or even given semester. But one of the things that I think is sort of implicit in this point as well is that not only is it a guide to where you've been, but also it kind of alludes to where you are going. And so as you'll see in a little bit here, when I show you my my version of a CV that's rapidly updated today for the workshop, you'll see that I try to indicate where I'm going next with how I articulate some of my current projects and those sorts of things. And we'll get into the details about that as well. Finally, a CV should be clearly organized and easy to follow. And search committees are going to have like basically maybe 5 minutes to look at your cover letter and to quickly skim your CV because they have maybe 100 or 200 applicants. I mean, I applied for history jobs, everybody, that had at least 100 applicants, if not more. So how do you stand out in the crowd of 100 people? You stand out through strategies like this. You want to have it, you don't want to create any speed bumps for a hiring committee, right? You don't want them to say like, oh, I don't know, this Dr. Vail, like his organization's weird. I'm not sure. I don't know. Would that mean should we hire him or should we consider him? I don't know. Like you don't want them to think that way. So you want it to be clear and organized and easy to follow. And also that can be kind of fun in the creation of the CV as well, if you're like me and like these types of things for fun. And then finally, referencing. You want to, I guess, pay particular attention to the specific kind of style guides that are most common within your specific degree or the profession you're going into. Because oftentimes the way a CV, even though you have generic categories and they can be kind of created similarly enough, there are distinctive ways to create a CV based on the profession you're in or that you're going into. So, just be mindful of that as well. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the components of the CV specifically. And I kind of already brought this up, so I won't belabor the point because I really want you all who are in attendance today to ask your questions. This is the time to start to think about asking us stuff that you've always wanted to ask, like, well, what do we do? And how do we go about this or that? And you didn't have a chance to. This is your chance. So very quickly, the components of the CV: teaching, research, service, and professional development. These are good sort of rock solid keystones to your CV. When I show you my example in a minute here, I'll have more than this, but this is a good sort of starting structure for all of us. So teaching, you want to identify the courses that you taught as a primary instructor, or what like some of the universities I taught at call instructor of record. You want to identify your sort of category as a graduate teaching assistant, the classes that you served in that capacity. And then if you have teaching evaluations, you want to at least identify somehow that you've had these evaluations done. Now that's specific to going on the job market, and not all hiring committees necessarily need to see that. But you can say like teaching evaluations on request, sort of like you on a resume, you would do that for references, right? You can kind of put an asterisk at the bottom of the teaching section and say teaching evaluations upon request. Or like, however, if that way the hiring committee knows or the search committee knows that they can request additional information if they feel it's needed. Research, you want to identify your publications in kind of a granular category sense. So like, for example, you want to have books and then articles and then book reviews. And I'll show you more comprehensively as mine as an example of how I sort of have done that. And then conference presentations and grants and so on and so forth. Then you want to go into your service. And so university, professional, I've added a third category, community, right? And sort of like, do I go out into the community and present on public history topics or that sort of thing? And then professional development, what kind of, you can put your conference attendance there, trainings there, workshops there. For example, I do a lot since we're, thank you eCampus for hosting this, by the way, and eCampus does an amazing job at providing a lot of different workshops for graduate students and for faculty members here at UNK. And I've taken advantage of those almost every semester as my schedule permits. And so I put those on my CV and, talk about workshops, and I say attended, and that just shows a professional development level for evaluators, whatever sort of role they're playing at the time, annual review committee, what have you. They see that you're working to expand your trainings as you can. So I think what I'm going to do now, if it's okay, Laura, I'd like to share my screen and share my CV with everybody. Oh, I think eCampus, you'll need to give me multiple share rights so that I can share my screen. As we wait for that, let's see, what about those of us who do not teach? For example, I need to create a CV as part of an application package for a grant to the Iowa State Historical Society. Scott, that's great. Yeah, maybe I'll answer that through example, because I can show you a part of my public history part of the CV that you can kind of build that way. You could probably replace teaching with like community outreach, or if you've done a lot of lectures or something to that effect, you could also replace it because you're sort of teaching in a different way. That's how I would argue. Let's see, it looks like I may have share rights now. I do.
You should have shared, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. So everyone can see this, I think. Here is my CV. Now I'm going to say this because when I used to see these examples earlier in my career, I would like completely be in freak out mode and intimidated. Do not be intimidated. I've been doing this a long time and I nerd out on this. So those two combinations make my CV what it is, I guess. But it's important to kind of think through how you want to present all of the things that you've done, things being professional grade level work. Now, I don't know about all of you, but for me, I have a hard time thinking some of the stuff I do like kind of counts because I just kind of do it because I love to do it. And I'm not really thinking on that level. You know, you're just like, oh yeah, I'll go and like speak to this group because they seem like awesome people and I like history and they do too. And here we are. That counts. And so it really does matter that you start to articulate in a detailed way, in a mindful way, how this all fits together for a larger sort of professional narrative that you're giving a grant sort of generating society, like in Scott's case, or you know, you're looking for a job, or you're trying to work in a collaborative sense, and they need a CV. So let's just go through this very quickly, if I can. We'll see. So here you see at the top. You see at the top here, I have an emboldened my name, my rank, and where I'm at in terms of institution affiliation. And then I have the department address and my department phone number, my office phone number, my email. And if you're on social media, then you can put that too. And I can show also, if everyone's interested, my sort of online presence, my website, which essentially is sort of a middle ground between a digital CV and an e-portfolio, which you learned about in the previous workshop. So it kind of is in the middle ground between those two things. And I'm happy to share that as well. Next category is education. And so you see sort of how I've articulated the education here: PhD, MA, BA, and then the main thing to remember in all of this is you want to be succinct and detailed at the same time. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that you want to make sure that it's easily constructed, that people can kind of just go through it in a sort of free flow way and not have speed bumps. And to do that means you have to be consistent. So always be consistent. If you have your dates at the end, like I do here, then have everything that way. Or if you, in other types of CVs, like this is kind of more of a humanities version of a CV. If you have more of a STEM version of a CV, then oftentimes they have the dates on this side for a lot of different CVs. You just want to be consistent and consistent across the board all the way through, and also consistent within sections of your CV. Okay, so enough on that, but those are really important rules. Academic appointments, here I articulate everything I've done since I got to UNK. Before UNK, I was at Kansas State. After I finished my PhD in 2012, I served as a faculty member in special collections and archives there for 3 years. So I identify that. Then in my so here's the first section, teaching. We have awards and honors. And then that's always the hardest. I always feel weird about putting that, but it's important to put that because it's a recognition that you have. This can be really fun and also kind of vexing at the same time if you're like me and you're like, this is really weird, like writing about myself. But it's important because you're being recognized for the things that you're doing. And so you need to identify that. Courses taught, just go through. I've broken them down for my annual. So I've basically curtailed this and detailed this for my annual review committees in my department, right? And so that's one of the things you want to sort of shift your CV up depending on what you're doing with it. So like if you're applying, for example, a good example of this I think is if you're applying to a Research One university position, then you're going to want to highlight your research first and not your teaching. If you're applying to like a teacher scholar sort of model, which is UNK, then I put the teaching first and then the research second, so that the hiring committee and the history department and search committee could go through and sort of see how those things connect. So you want to be mindful of that too. Like your CV, that's why it's fun to update it too, because you can adapt it to what you need to be more readily if it's updated. So here, all this is semester specific and all the classes I've taught since 2016. And then I also kept the Kansas State stuff on there. Invited class lectures. This is where I was invited to give other lectures in other classes or other things on campus, but they're still like lecture related. Advising all the different people, my MA committees, and then committees that I've served on. I won't belabor because this is, we still have a little bit to go through and it's almost 3 already. But experiential learning, some of the, I've been able to bring in authors to chat with my graduate students in my courses. And I think that's important to, as like an indication of the experiential learning, a version of it that I bring to my classes. And so I like to identify that in the teaching part. Again, this is probably a little more in depth than what you need for a job, a certain type of job position, but it's just a good example, I think, of how I've tried to identify the stuff I'm doing and how I think it matters. And I've really struggled, to be honest, with just overlooking some of this, like, oh, this is just stuff I'm doing in my day, and I'm not really thinking through, like, oh yeah, actually I need to identify, because the annual review committee needs to see what I've been doing in this last year, and part of that means I have to identify it. So again, just be thinking more holistically and in detailed sense at the same time how this all works out per the job or position or whatever you're using the CV for and submitting it for. Faculty development activities for teaching. I have another section for research, and I have another section for service. And each one of these identifies these eCampus workshops and other things that have been so beneficial for me personally here as a faculty member at UNK. Okay, so scholarship, again, being consistent, starting with awards and honors and kind of going through the most recent stuff that you've been recognized for. Again, it may feel weird, but it's important to identify those items, especially for a search committee, right? If you're sort of going down that track in the profession. Peer-reviewed publications. Here's where I mean, what I meant earlier when I said, you know, it's important to reflect where you've been, but also where you're going. So I have a new book project underway and under contract with University of Nebraska Press, which I got in 2020. I'm doing the research, but this indicates that I am going forward with this project, right? And so it's telling people who see this, oh, he has this new project. And that gives them an opportunity to ask you, like in an interview, hey, you identify this on your Vita about this new project. Why don't you tell us a little more about that and how that kind of fits into our department scenario or whatever. My other 2 books, I identified the reviews that have come out, the peer reviews. And if it's if they've won awards or honors, again, kind of weird to articulate, but you know, it's important to describe that because it's a recognition of your research and people need to see that in this sort of context. And then again, articles. I have a new research manuscript that I produced to agricultural history that is under review. I have another co-authored piece, multi-author piece with some awesome professors here on campus, also under review. And so again, all of these are articulating what I've done and when I've done them in the Chicago manual style, because that's the style of my profession. And it's also identifying where you're going next. And so that's important. So I'll kind of go through, here's some book reviews, right? I do book reviews, and those are almost more service publications, but I still keep them within the research. And so that's kind of how the research category looks. very quickly too, I have presentations, which is invited versus refereed, as you see here. So invited presentation would mean something to the effect of, I have some sort of formal thing on campus or formal thing in the community that's not an academic conference, right? So like, where do you put that? I mean, it's not like, I'm not going to Agricultural History Society academic conference where I present an official refereed paper, right? But I do all this other stuff in the community, which is really valuable and important to me, and to, I think, to our profession in history. So like, where do I put that and how do I identify that? Well, I've chosen to do it, identify it as like invited, right? So I'm invited to go to this official thing where I'm presenting on this research. It's an invited presentation, so it still counts, but it's just a different category. And then you can go to refereed, which is that more formal, solicited by the agriculture, like Organization of American Historians. I say virtual presentation because of the COVID-19 thing. We did this all on a virtual platform. So anyway, that's just how I differentiate between invited, refereed in terms of the presentations. I'm gonna kind of scroll through here. Here's how I identify fellowships, grants, and research awards. This is going to be different than how STEM students or STEM professionals articulate theirs, right? A STEM professional would more likely articulate fellowships, grants, and research awards by identifying something similar to this, but then having like probably like a summary paragraph, and identifying more specifically where the grant money went, what it did, and who was granting it, right? The granting institution. In humanities, it's more of a succinct sort of what it went toward and how, and the amounts, or sometimes not even that. So, and these, yes, you're right. Like these amounts are much, much more minuscule than on the STEM side of life. But historians, we get excited about whatever kind of grant money we can, sort of secure for ourselves. So anyway, yeah, there is a difference between the different types of funding streams and stuff between STEM and humanities. But this is how I kind of have decided to articulate it. And again, consistency is what matters most. Most historians sort of describe this in a similar way. Again, faculty development activities for research. And then finally, service. So service awards, again, identifying this stuff that you're doing that reflects to your service. I've broken into subcategories in the service section of professional, like sort of describing it. So here are my professional sort of stuff that I'm doing for the profession, sort of in a general sense, I guess. And then I break it down to college and university, appointments, committees, and I have a third category, participant, right? Because I get excited to participate in things on campus that's faculty service related, right? Even though I'm not necessarily heading the effort up, I'm a participant in the effort. And I realize like that's cool to think about and to do. And so I'm gonna put it down here. And then finally, department, right? Appointments, committees, and the participant. So again, staying consistent, I think is important. And then Scott, this is probably a little closer to what you're asking around, but public and community can be also a piece in the service category, which is sort of, you'll have to kind of balance out how you want to present what you've done specifically for that specific, that specific thing that you need to craft your Vita for. So that's one thing we can kind of talk about as well. But finally, select faculty development activities for service, again, attended, right? So identifying these different things that like service workshops and that sort of stuff. Finally, public history and digital history and curatorial work, I sort of have a final section for that. And so all the stuff that's sort of public related, media articles, reports, reviews, internet blogs, the stuff that's not really like peer reviewed, but still matters in expanding the public connections to history and to my profession, trying to find a place for that, because that matters, but not in the same way that other things matter in different categories. So like, how do you figure that out? And I've decided to have this sort of section of my Vita to identify all this stuff that is important but doesn't necessarily fit in these other types of categories. So two other things. I have language research proficiency, which means I can read and research with Spanish, but I really struggle speaking it, right? So like, how do you articulate that? And I just put research proficiency because that's what I was trained in my graduate work to have. And then professional memberships that I've identified here, that I'm a member of. And then finally, references. You do, in this sense, you do want to identify the different references, especially those who are writing you letters. So obviously for me, I have, and this has changed once I got the job here at UNK, but my current department chair, Dr. Ellis, who is Dean of Graduate Studies, knows my work, and I've worked with him in a graduate context in a lot of ways. So I have him down as a reference, and then some of my other colleagues across the profession. That helps. The final thing I'll say is that it's always premium to and utmost to be honest. You must be honest about the things you've done and the things you haven't done. So you do not want to ever put anything on here that is sort of fudging the lines between what you've actually done and what you hope to do. And that's, for example, why I put under my manuscript is under review, or I did identify it as forthcoming. Those are different stages of the peer review process. And so you want to always be like 100% honest about what you've done, when you've done it, and what does that mean. You don't ever want to sort of, put something on there that could be considered deceptive or dishonest, because people will find out. So I think I'll stop there. I'll stop sharing, Laura. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I think we have a couple more slides, and then I think we want to get to your questions.
There are a couple questions there. Do you want to, they're related to the CV. Do you want to address those now?
Sure. Happy to. Let's see. Aaron says, I am also wondering about what to include from the past. For instance, I have presented at NETA about EdTech, but am creating a CV for myself now as a history MA. I guess it depends on, yeah, I mean, if that's a peer-reviewed, like academic, I guess, Aaron, if that's an academic conference, you can claim that as an academic conference, like as a referee conference. If it's like an invited and non-academic, I mean, it's sort of up to you how you want to articulate that. I mean, generically though, if it's an academic presentation, like if I go and present at like Nebraska Online Worldwide or whatever that entity is in the system level, I would still put that as an academic conference because it's an academic, it's academically related, and it's peer reviewed by professionals, right? Like you have to submit an abstract. The abstract has to be accepted. You're put on a panel. There's a panel chair. There's a panel commentator, and they're going to like evaluate your presentation. That's what that's a refereed process, right? So you can feel comfortable putting that in an academic conference. Like if you have your conferences and then academic and then invited, or however you want to do that. Again, be consistent, but I think that definitely is something you should claim. And to me, as a historian, I'm excited that you did that and you have that sort of background, even though it's not necessarily directly like explicitly related to where you're at now in your professional endeavors. It's still important to articulate that. And for me, like I look at what I do as like almost a multi-tool. So I'm excited that you have that sort of tool in the toolbox, as it were. So I hope that answers your question, Aaron. Good question. Carly asks, in addition to Aaron's question, should teaching work done in undergrad be included, or should the CV be only at grad level work? I guess it depends on what the teaching, has done. Like what you're doing in the teaching, what category does it belong in? It's all about thinking through that. I mean, I personally feel like if I saw a graduate student who had teaching in their undergrad, you would have to like identify that, Carly, like how that kind of looks, right? Like, so were you an assistant? Did you just give a guest lecture? Did you, were you like a TA in a unique sort of category where you also helped grade, or you helped the teacher sort of the professor or whatever with lesson plans? Like that, you would have to sort of figure out where that would fit, but I would definitely count that. Thomas asks, sorry, Laura, I guess Thomas you just posted it. If you have transferred midway through MA, what is the best way to articulate that on your CV? I was a GA there as well, so I want to be sure to include it in both schools. Yeah, you could kind of, Thomas, that's a good question too. I mean, it's sort of the same conundrum in a way that I face, like, okay, I taught at K-State for 3 years in this sort of capacity. Like, how do I mean, I think that that's important. And especially the first year I was here, like I'm still obviously drawing on that direct experience in terms of how I'm teaching at UNK now. So I would say that it's like, put a category, like if you say teaching and you're a GA in these classes, you could identify that at the institution, and then maybe include, like, when I was a grad student, I included the professor of record's name and the class, you know, information there, just so that if anyone wanted to know, like, oh yeah, actually, I kind of want to talk to this professor of record, how that went. I got letters from these people, but I'm kind of curious. They could do that. I hope that answers your question. So, all right, Laura, it looks like we answered the questions for now.
Perfect. All right. So I think this last piece that we kind of wanted to touch on was the comparison between the resume and CV, which has probably really come through some of these examples. But I think one of the pieces that Dr. Vale really pointed out was that the resume is meant, the CV is meant to be academic. So from a resume standpoint, it's more experiential. So education is a piece of that, and you could definitely include academic experiences, but then you really want to highlight the other objectives or this profile summary relative to your very specific profession. So for students who are pursuing jobs in speech language pathology, I could give them all kinds of examples of things that I know SLPs are looking for, and you would want to get that kind of information put through on your resume based on the profession that you're specifically looking at.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I mean, and again, Laura's completely correct. In the CV realm, you also want to have that same kind of mindfulness about how to build your CV per your degree and per the profession that you're going into. And so like a history CV is going to look similar, but definitely not the same as an English CV or other types of humanities or other types of STEM fields. And so you do want to decide, you know, I mean, part of all of this is like deciding, like, does a resume suffice, or is a CV needed? And again, both resumes and CVs have similar information, but are identified in a succinct way, in an extreme detailed way. And so you just I guess have to be that's a part of the mindfulness of what you're doing as you go forward into the professional world that you're training in right now. And then also, I guess the final slide is just where do we go on campus to get additional assistance? You certainly can reach out to the Office of Graduate Studies, I'm certain, to get some of that guidance. But also UNK has academic advising and career development. And so most services are offered right now, obviously in remote settings, but you could reach out to them and inquire. And then there's a career education module that's also a really important piece to getting some of your some of your questions answered, excuse me. So these are two really important resources that UNK has right now that you can connect to get some of these longer term questions that you may have after our workshop today to ask and to get answered. So other questions? I mean, we still have some time. I'm happy to show my website if you want me to, but we want to make sure that we answer any kind of questions that you may have, and really nothing. I mean, everything is fair game, right? Because you don't want to not ask and then have to find out sort of a harder way. It's better to just ask now. I can tell you, like, I had all these questions as I was trying to put this stuff together back as a grad student, and I didn't have really that many people to ask. And so what I ended up doing is like just going online and saying, okay, well, whatever's publicly available for historian CVs, I guess I'll just like build my CV that way. And that's not a bad way. It's kind of a primitive way. It's better if you can ask people who've been doing it for longer than they would like to admit. So any other follow-up questions, things that you're still unclear about?
We do have a question, Dr. Vale.
Oh, it's from Scott. Under the education category, do you include everything or just discipline related? I guess my answer would be it's specific. First of all, it's specific to what kind of profession you're going into, right? So maybe certain jobs and certain professions don't necessarily require you to put everything in there, just like they want the most immediate stuff. And that's something you'll just kind of find out as you're applying for each job. You'll see like, okay, here are the things they really highlight, and here are the things that are probably good to include. And that's a judgment that you're going to have to make per job or per position or whatever. I think everything is fair game to put on there. I realized kind of the hard way, if I'm honest, that I was precluding things or excluding things in ways that I shouldn't have been, right? I thought like, oh, this is like kind of generic. But I guess one of the standout moments was that I was in a phone interview, which is like the sort of middle stage part of the job interview process for historians. Usually apply, then they do a phone interview, sometimes then they do a Skype interview, and then or a Zoom interview, and then they do a campus interview, and then they choose one. So yeah, it's like March Madness every job. Not kidding. But one of the things is like, I'm like, I didn't really put this on my Vita, but I actually did this, and the whole search community is like, wow, you really should have put that on there. Let's hear about that. And I thought, oh, I presume too much. And so I always say you're not going to err if you put everything on there. It's just a matter of how you articulate that and how you organize it. It looks like I have another CV question.
Real quick before you move to the next one.
Sure.
I just wanted to add in, I always think from the employer, whether it's a resume or a CV, that they want to be able to look back and see the story of your experience. So from my personal experiences, having maybe unrelated but previous experiences listed or other education can be helpful in them seeing that, like, oh, you started in this area and then I see you pursued a different area. That explains why some of your experiences here and not there. So that's just maybe more of a global or further back view.
No, Laura, that's a super good point, because it's important. That narrative is so important. If there are spaces in your experience that you're articulating, they're probably going to notice that, if not ask about it. So yeah, it's important to be mindful of how that is sort of evolving over the categories and how that accurately reflects what you've done and who you are as a professional person too. Let's see. I think Aaron's question is next. What is the best way to find ways to fill out the CV? It seems like opportunities for publishing as a grad student are pretty limited. Yeah, I mean, that's a large larger question that we can almost have a whole nother workshop about, Aaron. It's
yes, we would be very interested in that.
Yeah. I mean, that maybe we should pitch that to the Office of Graduate Studies, like about opportunities, like in grad school, like what kinds are out there, how to be thinking about that. That would actually be a really good session in and of itself. Opportunities workshop. I love it. Let's pitch that to Dean Ellis, actually.
Yeah.
And Dr. Weiss. Okay. Yeah. Find out. Yeah. I mean, I think you just sort of start where you're at and think about ways. Okay, how can I get involved with honor society in my department, or how can I get involved with what's my department, or what's my program doing in the community, or whatever's related to your training. But it's totally okay to start small and to kind of work. I mean, that's why I'm saying, like, when I saw a Vita like mine back when I started grad school, I was totally freaked out about it, because I'm like, well, how did that professor like find all this stuff to do? And so don't freak out. Just start small. Start what may seem even like a basic contribution, but then don't forget to add it. Like, so I have a working draft of my CV always. And so when I get done with stuff at the end of the week, I sort of have a tradition of getting my favorite coffee in town and then adding the stuff to my CV once a week, once a month, depending on whatever's happening, maybe every 2 weeks, because I'm not doing that much all the time, although it kind of feels like I am. But yeah, I mean, and I know that sounds like kind of nerdy and stuff like that, but it's really helpful because, you got to figure out ways to like remember what you've done because otherwise it'll be like off in the ether and you'll be like, wait, so I guess so where did that belong and how did that fit? So yeah, Laura, did you have anything that you wanted to add with that type of strategy?
No, I think it sounds like you're better at that than I am. And I guess I was thinking earlier too that, and especially for resumes and probably for a CV, that you can cater it to the position that you're looking at as well. So I might highlight certain things. When I have applied for positions, I have made a resume specifically for that position, or I have made sure my CV reflects exactly what a position is looking for. So it doesn't have to be an all-encompassing, it can be very tailored and you'll keep redoing it.
I totally agree. I guess that's kind of answering the next question too, about how do you build a CV if you don't have any relevant teaching or publications. Start building your CV from what you've got, what you do have, and then think, and that's going to force, at least it did for me, but I would imagine that's going to force everybody who's sort of going through this exercise. It'll force you to start thinking more holistically about what you've done and how you see it fitting into a professional sort of display of your abilities and who you are as a professional person. And then you just keep building from there. So sort of, I think in the question, there's this feeling of intimidation, and it can be totally intimidating. And that's one of the reasons I'm glad we can even have these types of workshops so we can talk about this, because there is an emotional side, at least there was for me, of crafting this kind of stuff and hoping that you have enough, or do you have enough? And I had those questions too. So just the best piece of advice I received, and I give it freely to everyone, is that work from what you have. And that's going to force you to think more specifically and holistically about what you've done and who you are as a professional person, and then build from there. So if you don't have those yet, that's okay. What do you have, as sort of my question. Then should military service be included in a CV? Boy, Scott, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess I don't know what Laura's idea is about this. I don't know. I guess it depends. Probably one answer would be that it depends on what kind of work or position you're going into. And again, how it relates to the larger professional you, right? And so, and that's more about like how reflective it is of you and how much it works into who you are as a professional person. You know, and then I'm not sure, like, you know, veteran status in the job process by itself has a role to play too. So it all depends on what the job is. But if it's certainly relevant for you and it connects to where you want to go, then I don't see personally a problem putting it on there. It just matters sort of where it fits for you. So again, a CV and to an extent a resume in some ways are very personal documents, right? They're reflecting your efforts in your life, how work experience and other types of experience inform what you've done and where you're going. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, I just be mindful, like everything else, how you fit that into what story you're telling through the work that you've done, I guess, if that helps. Laura, did you have anything you wanted to add with that?
I agree. I think if it helps to tell the story of your experience, or if it represents a chunk of time that someone might be saying, well, I wonder what they were doing during that time. I think that just helps to paint the picture, and you can probably highlight it and build it up as much as it's relevant to what you're doing, or just a statement. And then this is what I did during that time. So you can probably characterize it how you feel like it relates.
How important is it to have a LinkedIn profile? Social media generally is a mixed bag. I think that it's important to have a presence somewhere out there, but the platforms, if that's okay, if I can share my screen really quickly. I know we have like 3 minutes left here, but I wanted to share my screen really quickly just so that we can look at, well, shoot, let's see. Thought I had my website up, and like, let me pull it up really quickly. My answer, I guess, is that from my perspective and sort of from the humanities professional perspective, you want to have a presence, but I would think very carefully about what that presence looks like. All of us know sort of like the disaster zone that can be Twitter. So just be mindful, like everything else. I mean, the way I approach social media is primarily like I post stuff there that I wouldn't mind anyone in the world knowing. And so professionally, also, I think LinkedIn has kind of a unique space where it can connect you to different types. It has like AI connections where it can connect to different professional descriptions and platforms and jobs. And so I think that there can be benefit. You know, I always say have as many quivers like arrows in the quiver that you can when you're on the job hunt. But I guess I would provide a cautionary tale, like be cautious about what kind of social media you engage in and how you engage in it, especially if you're using it not for like a personal thing, but for a professional thing. And so it really depends on how you're characterizing that whole world for yourself. But very quickly, this is just, you can go to davidvail.net. This is sort of a middle ground between CV and ePortfolio from the last workshop that you can also watch on Office of Grad Studies website. I have a bio that kind of describes who I am and what I do. I have a writing category that has my recent projects. Teaching, which identifies my courses. Public history, where I identify things I've been doing. I haven't updated in a while. I wasn't able to update that before our workshop today. And then media, different types of publications that sort of are directly connected to the stuff in my Vita, right? That are also reside in places. And then finally, news and contact. So very like basic kind of ePortfolio stuff, but it's also kind of CV related. So. I think we're at 3:30.
Okay, if there's no other questions, that will conclude our workshop today. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Dr. Vail and Mrs. Moody, for being wonderful presenters today. And lastly, a reminder, these workshops are recorded and posted on the UNK's website under the Graduate Studies page. And if you just search Professional Development Workshops, you will find them there. Again, thank you all for joining, and that is the end of our workshop today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.